It was just another long night, like so many others in that public hospital where the corridors smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion. Laura had lost count of the shifts she had worked, the meals she had skipped, the promises she had made to herself to sleep properly tomorrow. She had been a nurse for 5 years, but it felt like she had aged 20 since she started. Between bandages, medical reports, and muffled cries from family members, what kept her there was not the salary, which barely covered her monthly bills, but a kind of strength she couldn't name. On that particular night, there were 20 minutes left in her shift when the ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics rushed out and pushed a stretcher with a man covered in a thin, wet blanket, showing visible signs of malnutrition. His hair was disheveled, his beard long, his hands bruised. He had reportedly been found lying on a staircase in front of a supermarket after days without food. No ID. No name. Laura received the patient with the same care she would give anyone else. But there was something about him, something that made her slow down and pay more attention than protocol required. Maybe it was his gaze, lost, but conscious, or the fact that, even in such a fragile state, he tried to smile when he saw her. She couldn't explain it. She just felt it. She took him to the observation ward, tended to his wounds, ordered tests, and set up in 4. She spoke to him in a low voice. "Do you remember your name?" He shook his head. "Would you like me to call you something?" He replied with a slight smile, "Call me Miguel." Gradually, the other professionals went about their business, but Laura stayed longer than necessary by his side. She brought him an extra blanket. She replaced his pillow with a softer one. She offered him tea. He thanked her for everything with a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in anyone in a long time. It was as if he could see beyond the walls, beyond the hospital conditions. When the shift changed, before leaving, Laura looked at Miguel one last time. He was already asleep. And at that moment, she felt that it would not be the last time she would see that man. She didn't know why. She just knew. And if you're here and want to know what happens after this encounter, subscribe to the channel now. Because what you're about to hear in this story goes beyond coincidence. It goes beyond destiny. It's about the kind of reunion we don't even dream of, but that changes everything. Turn on the bell, leave a like, and get ready, because the beginning was already powerful, but what comes next will move you even more. In the days that followed, Miguel remained under observation. Laura, even when she was working other shifts, stopped by to see him. And each conversation was a discovery. He didn't talk much about his past. He only said that he had had another life, but that he had lost everything because of bad choices. He spoke with a disconcerting calm, like someone who had made peace with his mistakes. And the most curious thing, he didn't ask for anything. He didn't complain. He didn't demand attention. Laura found herself smiling more. She returned from the hospital with a lighter heart. She thought about him on her way home, and sometimes found herself wondering what it would be like if he had another chance, if he could start over. She didn't know that, in caring for him, she was also being healed. Not from physical wounds, but from the invisible pain that time alone cannot take away. 2 weeks later, Miguel was discharged. The hospital couldn't keep him there any longer. Laura found out at the end of her shift. She rushed to the reception desk, but he was already gone. There was no address. No contact information. He had disappeared the same way he had arrived, in silence. And that affected her more than she imagined. In the days that followed, she searched shelters. She asked her colleagues. She even went around the area where he had been found. Nothing. It was as if it had been a dream. But a dream that had left real marks. 3 months passed. Laura got on with her life. She paid her bills on credit, worked double shifts, and wore the same tired smile, but now with a gap. An emptiness she tried to ignore, but which insisted on reminding her that something had been left behind. Then, one Wednesday morning, when she arrived at the hospital for another shift, she found an envelope on her desk. No sender. No identification. Inside, there was only a card with a sentence. To the one who took care of me when no one else was looking. I'll wait for you on Saturday at 7 p.m. at Café Mirante, Miguel. Laura's heart raced. The cafe was known for being small and discreet, located in a quiet neighborhood. They had never talked about this place. And yet, he knew. She hesitated for a few days. She thought about not going. She thought it might be a mistake. Or disappointment. But on Saturday, at 6:40 p.m., she was already at the door. She went in. The atmosphere was cozy. Low lighting, few tables, the smell of coffee and freshly baked cake. Miguel hadn't arrived yet. She sat down. She waited. At 7 p.m. sharp, the door opened. And who walked in wasn't the same Miguel from the hospital stretcher. It was a man with a firm posture, clean-shaven, wearing a discreet but elegant suit. His skin was rosier, his gaze still the same. But now, there was something more. There was certainty. There was purpose. He walked over to the table. He stopped. And he said, "Laura. Thank you for coming. Now, can I tell you who I really am?" And that's where we stop. Because part 2 begins with this revelation. And what he says changes everything. Everything. If you want to know who Miguel really is, the reason behind all this, and what he has in store for her, subscribe now, activate the bell, and follow the next part. Because this story is just beginning. Miguel sat across from Laura with the calmness of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. The waiter approached, he ordered 2 coffees, and then handed her an envelope. "Before we say anything, I want you to read this." Laura took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was thick and elegant. Inside was a handwritten letter and a sheet of paper with the name of a foundation. She looked at him, confused. "You can read it," he said with a half-smile. "It all starts there." In the letter, Miguel recounted his life before arriving at the hospital. He was a quiet businessman involved in social impact projects. His family came from a modest background, but he had grown up surrounded by comfort. Still, he had always been troubled by a nagging doubt: did his decisions, donations, and projects really touch the people who needed them most, or was it all just numbers and paperwork? 2 years earlier, after a personal crisis and the end of a relationship that left him emotionally shaken, Miguel decided he needed to understand the reality beyond the walls of his company. He sold shares, reduced his public exposure, and created a plan to pose as someone in a vulnerable situation and live the experience of someone at rock bottom, without asking for help because of his status, without using his name as a shield. It was on this journey that he ended up fainting from hunger on a staircase and being taken to the hospital. And it was there that he met Laura. "You were the first person to treat me like a human being, without knowing anything about me," he said, looking into her eyes. "You didn't just give me a blanket. You gave me dignity." Laura lowered the letter, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't know if it was right to get close to you. You took care of me as if I were nobody. And I fell in love with that. With you. With the way you treat people. But I couldn't show up in a suit the next day and tell you I was a millionaire. It would have sounded like a trick. Like manipulation." She took a deep breath. Her heart was still racing. "And now? Why now?" "Because I can't pretend you're just a beautiful memory anymore. Because I need you to know everything, even if you decide never to speak to me again." He then took out another envelope. This time, it contained documents from the foundation he had created weeks after leaving the hospital, an institution to support healthcare professionals, especially nurses suffering from burnout and overload. The name of the project, Instituto Esperanza, Hope Institute. And in the founding charter, Laura's name appeared as the inspiration for the cause. "You saved me. Now I want, in some way, to save those who are saving others every day, just like you do." Laura was silent. It was a lot to take in. It was a whirlwind of information. A mixture of shock, tenderness, and mistrust. "Is that why you called me here?" she asked. "Not only that." He took a small box out of his jacket's inside pocket. It was small, made of dark wood. He placed it on the table. But he didn't open it. "I thought about doing this in many ways. With flowers, with music. But the truth is, none of that suits you. So, I'm just being honest. Laura, I fell in love with who you are. The way you talk to your patients. The determination with which you care for them even when you're exhausted. The fact that you don't care about looking perfect, but about being true." He opened the box. A discreet ring with a small crystal in the center. "It's not about wealth. It's about recognition. About finding, at the worst moment of my life, the best person possible. And I want to spend the rest of my days remembering that. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to slow down. Laura looked at the ring, then at him. She remembered every early morning at the hospital. The exchanged glances. The conversations in which he listened more than he spoke. And she realized that, even without knowing it, she already loved him. "You confused me, you knocked me off my feet, but you also made me feel seen," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what the future holds. But if I'm going to find out with you, I want to try." He smiled. Not a smile of relief, but of confirmation. Like someone who always knew that moment would come, he just didn't know when. In the days that followed, their story began to spread. First among their colleagues at the hospital, then in the local press, until they became a symbol of something people were missing: real, pure, unexpected encounters. The foundation gained momentum. Laura joined the board but continued to work as a nurse. She turned down high-ranking positions. She wanted to stay where the story began. Their home was simple. A small garden with a vegetable patch at the back and books in every corner. They lived between the routine of shifts and social projects that grew over time. And no matter how much their responsibilities increased, one thing remained the same: the look they exchanged when they were silent. A look that remembers what really matters. A year later, they were married in an intimate ceremony at the same cafe where everything had been revealed. Few guests. Lots of emotion. The owner closed the place just for them. The waiter who had served them that night was responsible for bringing the rings. During their vows, Laura said, "You came into my life when I thought there was only repetition and exhaustion. You showed me that the unexpected can be the best part." Miguel replied, "You saw me when I was invisible even to myself. You loved me before you knew any numbers, any titles. That's why, this love is the most real I've ever known." And if you want to know how the wedding went, what they built together after that, and how this story inspired thousands of others, then get ready for part 3. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Because the ending comes with strength, emotion, and that taste of a new beginning that only real life can deliver. Turn on the notifications, leave a like, and come with me. The next part is what makes this story an unforgettable memory. If you've followed this story so far and haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time. Because what comes next isn't just the ending of an unlikely romance, it's the beginning of a journey that proves that when someone sees your essence in silence, the rest of the world may doubt it, but you'll never forget who was there for you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and hold on to this ending. The wedding at the cafe remained in the memory not only of the two of them, but of everyone who was there. Nothing there was about luxury, but about truth. About two different worlds that found each other in vulnerability and chose to stay together even after the truth was revealed. After the ceremony, Laura and Miguel decided to keep their routine simple. Even with invitations coming from all sides, interviews, documentaries, million-dollar projects, they chose to prioritize direct impact. The Hope Institute was growing rapidly, but they made a point of getting to know each new nurse they supported, each case they handled. For Laura, nothing was more important than looking into the eyes of those in need and saying, "I understand you." Miguel, on the other hand, dove into the behind-the-scenes management, investing strategically so that the project could sustain itself without depending on his image. He wanted it to be bigger than the two of them. He wanted their story to inspire, yes, but he wanted the daily work to be what transformed realities. 3 years have passed since the day Miguel reappeared at the cafe with the letter and the ring. Now they have a daughter, Helena. She has curly hair, a curious gaze, and a habit of holding her mother's fingers whenever she sees someone sad. She grew up amid conversations about empathy, simple dinners, and long shifts. Miguel read to her before bed, even when he was tired. Laura took her to the hospital corridors on her days off, teaching her from an early age that care is not only given with medicine, but with presence. One spring Saturday, Laura was invited to speak at a health conference in another city. Miguel insisted that she accept. He said it was time for people to hear the voice that had once made him believe again. She hesitated, but went. The auditorium was packed. Nurses, doctors, students. Laura took the stage wearing the same lab coat she had worn since her first days on the job. She said she wasn't there to talk about overcoming adversity or fame. She was there to remind everyone that every shift worked with dedication, even on the worst days, can be the invisible bridge that saves not only others, but also oneself. At the end, they gave her a standing ovation. Not because she was a celebrity, but because she was someone who lived what she spoke about. On her way home, at the airport, she saw a girl sleeping on a bench with her mother beside her, exhausted, holding a folder of medical documents. Laura offered her some water. She bought her a snack. And without telling her name, she smiled as she did with her patients. Because, deep down, she knew, it's not about recognition. It's about presence. Back in the city, Miguel and Helena were waiting for her with flowers picked from the garden and a note, "Listening to you changes the world more than any investment." Shortly thereafter, they were invited to open a new branch of the institute, this time exclusively for single mothers in the healthcare field. The proposal was bold, to offer temporary housing, emotional support, and professional retraining to nurses who had left their careers due to a lack of family structure. It was the first initiative of its kind in the country. During the inauguration, Miguel held Helena in his arms. Laura, moved, spoke in a firm tone. Behind every professional who cares for others, there is someone who also needs care. And when that care comes from society, healing reaches more people than we can count. In the months that followed, they began to receive letters, videos, and stories from people who had returned to the profession, saved lives, and built families, all inspired by their story. But the most powerful came from a patient Laura had cared for in her first year of nursing, 10 years earlier. The letter read, "That day, I had no one. You were the only reason I didn't give up. Today I am a nurse, thanks to you. And I hope one day I can do the same for someone else." Laura cried silently. Miguel held her hand. And Helena, not quite understanding, simply said, "Mommy does good for people." Time passed. The institute became a benchmark. They continued to refuse the spotlight, choosing instead to make an invisible impact. And even with all the structure and recognition, they maintained the same rituals: coffee in the late afternoon, handwritten letters on birthdays, and regular visits to the hospital where it all began. Once, Laura sat next to a young nurse on her first shift. The girl was trembling, nervous, feeling like she couldn't handle it. Laura just said, "You don't need to know everything right now. You just need to care. The rest, you'll learn." And that was it. The essence that she and Miguel carried throughout their journey. On the Institute's 5th anniversary, they decided to do something special, not a gala event, but an open letter published on all channels. They wrote it together. It read, "This story began with a blanket, a look, and a gesture. Today, it has become a support network that has taught us that love does not live in grand revelations, but in the constancy of small acts. That caring, even without knowing who the other person is, can be the biggest turning point in your own life. And that every beautiful story begins when someone has the courage to see, and to stay." The post went viral. But more important than the clicks was the impact on the streets. People started donating, helping, looking more closely at those sleeping on the sidewalks. Because, after all, anyone could be a Miguel. And if you've made it this far, take one thing with you: you may never get an envelope back, or a ring, or a proposal at a cafe. But the care you offer without expecting anything in return can change destinies. Maybe yours. Maybe someone's who is invisible today, but essential tomorrow. If you haven't signed up yet, do it now. Because the next stories you'll see here are real. And they show that the world is still made up of unlikely encounters, full hearts, and choices that are worth more than any fortune. Turn on the bell. Share with someone you believe in. And come back for the next video. Because when love is sincere, it always comes back. Sometimes in a suit. Sometimes hungry. But always, transformed.